Yesterday's price is not today's price. Why?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of the Dynasty Market Watch podcast. Tonight, we got our second guest ever, one of my favorite people to talk to about Dynasty and just in general, Jakob Sanderson at Jakob Sanderson on Twitter. That's Jacob with a K, not a C. Jacob, how are we doing tonight?
Doing great. I'm looking forward to this. I listened to the episode that you guys did. Was it last night that you recorded it or yesterday was released? Whatever, the most recent episode. That was really fun. So listen to that. Work today, and I'm ready to chat now. I mean, we just did that big draft together, so it's nice to get in kind of while we've already seen some massive shifts. You know, like it's basically been one full week since we did that draft. Maybe a week and a half for some of the picks, 2 weeks for the first 6 rounds or so. It's been wild to see that already shake out.
Yeah, Jacob, really excited for you to be here with us. Obviously, we talk a lot in the group chat, but with that group chat, I know you're a little angry with me, so I appreciate you still hopping on with us and sporting that green.
You said some extremely mean things about my favorite player to watch in the National Football League. You called him a projection, despite having been an absolutely elite talent ever since high school, since being a 5-star recruit, who then walked onto an Ohio State team with the best wide receiver room in the country, being the best wide receiver on that team, then walking into the NFL, immediately earning an alpha target share, displacing other professional wide receivers. And then, now, he's just a projection. We got to take guys with a handful of games who used to run rotational routes at Brigham Young University. That's a sure thing. That's a lock. But Garrett Wilson, thoroughbred, superstar, future Hall of Fame player, projection.
It's not often that you have someone, myself, ranked Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 7, and just getting shit down my throat. No, projection. I said a projection to a degree. And maybe we'll get into that. But I think what's cool about this space is that we can have all these differing opinions, and we have a bunch of different team builds and styles. And so let's just hop right into it, Jacob. We asked Mike this. Mike has our high for amount of teams, and it was in the 90s.
He's got me beat.
Jacob, are we topping 90?
We are not, unless you count all my best ball teams. No, if we count teams that I actually have to set a lineup on Sunday, 62 Dynasty teams and 14 redraft teams. So 76 total.
14 redraft. Wow. Okay.
So I like, it's a mix in redraft. Like I have a couple just kind of joke redraft leagues with patrons and work and stuff. But I play a decent amount of high stakes redraft stuff on FFPC, which is probably where most of my sweats are coming from in the season, honestly, rather than Dynasty. It's funny because Brian was saying you must roster a ton of Waddle. I roster 0 Waddles in 63 Dynasty leagues, but I do have him on 3 of my high stakes teams. So I've been tilting these Waddle touchdowns every week. So that's certainly I'm on both sides of the aisle for sure.
That's crazy to me that you have 0 Waddles, because you even say that you don't really do it intentionally, but you always just end up diversifying just on accident, essentially, because you're willing to buy or sell any player at market.
Yeah, Waddle's just a guy that I've traded for I've never really drafted him much. I mean, first off, I was just clearly wrong about him as a prospect. So I never really started with a high portion of Waddles. And then basically throughout that time, I've just thought that he was even though I was okay, I was clearly wrong and he's way better than I thought. Every time that I thought that, the market was still higher on him. So then finally, we kind of got into this year where he's kind of having an off year. And now I would say I'm probably more closer to being with the market on Jalen Waddle. But I just have always been in a position where there's been other guys that I prefer at his position. And then generally speaking, when we're talking about those young wide receivers that aren't Chase and Jefferson, that's just kind of a unit of player that I'm usually not super into overall in Dynasty. So I'm kind of picking a few of my favorites, and for the most part, trading away the other ones. So I've had Waddles on occasion where they pop onto my teams, and then usually they get sent out.
So that will take us kind of into the first segment that when you mentioned about Waddle and the youth, because one of the things that I've known you for since we started playing together is you constantly used to harp in the group chat, like, why are you guys so obsessed with these 23-year-olds who score 13 points a game just because like they have a couple good games? You're not one to value longevity unless it's tied to an elite asset. Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, their longevity counts for you. Gabriel Davis, you don't give a shit how many years in the league he plays.
Yeah, I tend to be like, I tend to care about youth for a couple of reasons. Like I care about youth from like the uncertainty angle, in the sense of like the less of a sample we have on someone, the better chance there is that they're going to be way better in the future. And I care about youth from certainly a longevity factor for truly elite assets. And then I care about youth from the sense that there's like value insulation that comes with that, where, you know, they're going to be more resistant to debilitating injuries, completely sucking them of value. But yeah, I would say that the players like the Waddles and the Smiths and the Higginses, like kind of as a unit, are players that like, even some of which I really love and I do draft and redraft leagues, I look at it and I'm like, man, I would just rather take like the older players who score way more points than them and then just try to be overweight on picks. So I tend to have a lot of olds on my teams. I also usually tend to have picks on my teams. I tend to not really have a lot of like, I always want a couple, but I tend not to have like a high concentration of a bunch of young guys and not a lot of picks. Probably the young guys that I take the biggest shots on outside of the elites are like, if we go down a tier, where it's like, okay, this guy, we're not really investing all that much in. The opportunity cost at veteran now is like just kind of starter level instead of superstar level. That's where, sure, like, why not give me the guy who has the chance to be way better than we think he's going to be versus, like you kind of get into like that, like Chris Godwin, Terry McLaurin range of guys where it's like you take one of them in a startup, they're certainly never going to be a terrible pick. They're never going to hurt you. They're going to have reliable production, but you're never going to look back on your startup and be like, oh man, that's the pick that like put me over the top. It's because I invested in like this guy that everybody knows exactly what he is.
Right. And I think just to this point, Jacob, I really, in my opinion, and maybe you differ here, that I think in a general community sense, age is one of the highest listed skills, right? So like everyone's like, if someone comes to me and is like, this receiver is 23, and then they start listing actual skills, it's like, okay, well, I can't take you seriously right now, because it's like your first thing when you like go on a first day is like, I'm 23, so like I'm still gonna be around for 70 years. Like, okay, cool. Like that doesn't really impress me much.
Especially with quarterbacks, man. Like I've heard recently someone say, yeah, but Dak's 30. I just wanted to punch something.
That's the quarterback stuff is always hilarious.
Dak's 30, so he only has 8 years left. Like, come the fuck on.
I know
Dak Prescott will be starting in the NFL longer than Bijan Robinson.
I know the guy you're talking about on Twitter that was like, dude, he's 30. Like, sell now. Like, or how about this? Like, he could stick around for another 8 years.
Oh, that guy on Twitter. I don't even remember who it is, or I would shame him.
He gave away for like a second or something. Yeah.
Man, we got some Dak buys in. I forgot about that. That was craziness. That's the same guy who got Puka and McBride off you for Komet.
That's the same guy. Oh man,
derived,
that weird ass name, like derived or whatever. Like,
yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, the Dak stuff. Oh man, I mean, after that San Francisco 49ers game was really painful. Because I had Dallas on a parlay that game, and I needed some like Pollard points and some Lamb points, and so in the short term, that was like one of the most annoying football games of the year. But in the long term, it was great. I think I bought Dak like 4 times in that week. I've called it the cycle of Dak his whole career, which is basically his entire career. He's either existed as the most expensive of the not elite quarterbacks or as the least expensive of the elite quarterbacks. And like in terms of how people talk about it, people either be like, why would I pay up for Dak? I can just have Jared Goff. And then other times people be like, why would I pay up for Trevor Lawrence? I could just have Dak. And basically when he's in the latter category is when I never roster Dak. And then when he's in the other categories, then I'm always buying Dak. So every year, like he's probably one of the players that I've been most alternatingly in and out on, like on a year-to-year, half-season to half-season basis. where he's gotten his own cycle of Dak name coming from that.
He is, in my experience, in my 4 or 5 years of playing Dynasty, he is like that guy that like 1 year he's a first round startup, then he's a fifth round startup, then he's a third round startup, and it's like, what are we doing here? And I think a lot of it was baked in his initial costs was all of those inflated rushing touchdowns. He wasn't rushing, but he was getting rushing touchdowns. Every time they were in the red zone, he was getting like 8 to 10 touchdowns. And it was just like, okay, is this kind of like Jalen Hurts light, maybe? I'm not comparing the two, but other than, just rushing touchdown value. But it's interesting to think about.
I think a big part of it with Dak is that he came in just like a dark zone of quarterbacks. Like if you think about the quarterbacks that are the age range of Dak Prescott, there like really aren't any that are as good as him, right? Like Carson Wentz is like now done. Yeah. Jared Goff is fine. He's Jared Goff. Andrew Luck retired. Cam Newton's done. Like that range of like 2010 to Russell Wilson is over the hill now. Like that, like 2010 to 2014 or whatever it was like either a lot of busts or early retirements or like early declines. And so it's kind of just Dak sitting there where you're like, oh, like he's younger. So he's like clearly better than like Cousins or Stafford or whatever. He's like 5 years younger than these guys. But then you look at it and it's like, okay, but you can't like value him anywhere close. You'd value like, like Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert, whatever. It's like, what do you do with Dak? And he just kind of sits in the middle. He's just like been in his own tier forever.
It's funny that like all those peers, like you said, are out of the league, or most of them are out of the league right now. I know you've always been higher on Dak in real life than almost anybody in our group chat. But
that's for sure. I've been in and out in fantasy, but I've always stand him aggressively.
You've always, Dak's always been your guy. Would you? Yeah. So you probably would not agree with me. I don't think it's just the Chargers game either that has my attention. I think this might be the best he's ever been playing right now. I've been incredibly impressed with him this year.
I think he's been playing great this year. And, he's kind of doing what Dak does every year to me, which is that like he plays at an elite quarterback level in like 80% of his games, but his bad games are just like visibly awful. Yeah. And like, it's been a trend long enough now that I kind of can't really say that it's not, in the sense that yes, like he is way better at home than on the road, and he is far better against he will just beat the shit out of bad opponents, and he is like liable for a stinker against good opponents from time to time. So like it's honestly kind of Kirk Cousins-esque, but he's just like a better Kirk Cousins. Like I've always been like a Kirk stan too in IRL. Like, and they are kind of similar in that sense of like they do separate from the class of average quarterbacks, but it's like, would you fully trust them like on the road in a playoff game, or are they gonna like fail? And it's like more often than not they do fail. But on the whole of a season, like their numbers are just gonna look great. And so I've always had the faith that NFL playoff stuff and like small sample games are pretty random, and like all it's going to take is 1 year for Dak to be hot at the right time, and then all of a sudden he's clutch. But it's that's on him. Like he has to do that one of these years.
Man, I would have trusted Kirk Cousins in a big game this year. It was so tragic how that injury happened, because that dude was willing his team back into the playoff race with his play. So that was just a bummer.
I think that was a perfect correlation to draw there, Jacob, to Cousins. Is just like narrative is so prevalent in people's values as like a herd mentality. Like, oh, Kirk Cousins, like I watched him on Monday night and he threw 3 picks. And it was like, okay, well, it was 8-0 touchdown interception the first 2 games before that, but whatever. All right.
I think a lot of people still think Dak is having a bad year because the 49ers game was so horrendous. Yeah. And that was the game that everybody watched. So it's like, I think if you ask most people, it's like, okay, he was good on the Chargers game, but I think people's lasting view of Dak at this point is like he threw up all over himself against the 49ers. Every other game he's been great, at least for IRL. Fun little stretch for him coming up. Like he gets the Eagles this week. It'll be a high profile game. I think if he crushes this week, and especially if they win, then all of a sudden I think people will be like, oh, actually Dak's having a good year.
Well, and let's be honest, it's partially a Dallas Cowboys quarterback thing. Tony Romo was disrespected his entire career. Like Tony Romo was
people
awesome,
love to hate on the Cowboys. He was
totally disrespected. I mean, we can just do 20 minutes on Dak, but Brian, want to get us back on topic here?
Those late first plus Desmond Ridder for Dak deals are looking pretty great right now.
we could start another podcast maybe some other time gushing about Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott. So the couple other things that I think a lot of people will be interested to hear from you, Jacob. One, first of all, are you like Zoltan? Are you a tank or a contend, no in between, or are you a guy that might? Okay, go ahead.
Not really, but also kind of. Going into the season, I'm definitely not. Like I would say, I like this year was kind of different for me because I was like. This year's different than almost any other year that I've been playing in the sense that Caleb Williams is, to me at least, like even above Bijan, above Lawrence, is like the most appealing first overall pick option that I can recall. And I also think it's kind of a clear top 3/4, depending on the tight end premium and your scoring settings. So, and then you add in how excited people are for Caleb, like universally, and how many people are willing to tank pretty proactively this year. And I did feel as though like, hey, like there's going to be some leagues where if you want a shot at the 101, like the race starts immediately. So I kind of took it as a spot where I was just like, look, the chance to turn basically a first that's worth 1 first into an asset that's probably worth like 3.5 firsts before he even plays football. Like I just cannot, it would be irresponsible portfolio management to be underweight on him. So I kind of looked at it and I was like, what are my 10 lowest value teams? And let's just like blow them up and try to secure 101 on 70 to 80% of them and 102 on, I guess, the rest. And then we'll see how it goes for the rest of the season. So I did more like preemptive tanking this year than I ever have. That being said, for the most part, I still don't.
The most legendary tank off I've seen in my 6 years.
Yeah, which is hilarious because that is my second most stripped down roster. And I won't get 101 on it. It's pretty crazy.
I literally beat Jake 220 to 20 this past week. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, like Jake
scored
240.
I really didn't expect him to go to.
Jake scored 0 a week or two ago with like a max PF of 1.7 or some shit like that. It's insane.
It's pretty wild.
So I'm
quite tilting.
So on that topic of, I think certain people tank different ways, right? So like sometimes people want a stable or like an anchor. From my experience with your tanking, and we're talking about this one specific league, and I think from hearing
you in office. Or is it Idiot Box? I always get those two confused because they both have an orange logo. Okay, they both have an orange logo, and the startups were like 2 weeks apart. So I can never keep those. Like I always forget who's in which one, and you're in Idiot Box, not Office. Okay.
Jacob, you literally ask him if he's in office like once every 6 months. Like it's just so funny to me. Like I've heard that question like 3 times in the group chat.
That's fair. It's because he is an Idiot Box, and like those. Okay, like those the 2 startups. I don't even think Brian was in Idiot Box originally. I think he took over an Orphan.
No.
Right?
Yep.
Okay, so those 2 startups were like literally within 2 weeks of each other, and they both have like the orange sleeper like made icon without any custom icon, and they've been side by side in my like league scroll since the day they were drafted. So to me, they're just the same league, and like I couldn't tell you like who's in which one at any point in time. And I will ask Brian if he's in office in 3 months' time.
That's awesome.
Idiot Box, I'm contending. Right. Office is my other teardown. That's in like a league in this sort of extended universe of friends. I would say where I am extreme, Brian, which I think you were leading to, is like once I have made the decision to tank, I definitely am very aggressive about it. Like there's some people where it's like, oh, like I'll just leave it. I am kind of a laissez-faire in the end of August person. Like I think Mike is much more, I want to have my like championship teams. I want to have my loser teams. My perspective on it, at least for the first few weeks of the season, is like all sorts of unexpected shit happens. Like there's going to be a couple teams that look really good that suffer some debilitating injuries. You're going to have a few players on your team that you thought were worth a lot that are worth nothing. And you're going to have a few players on your team that you thought were worth nothing and they're worth a lot. So like, why not give some of my teams the chance to compete, right? Like it would suck if you thought you had a really bad value team, but you had like Puka and Kyron Williams on it, and then you tore down the whole team before the season, when in actuality, like just having that alone could have made the difference between what you thought was the 9th best team and what's actually the 4th best team or something like that.
Right.
So I usually give it 4 or 5 weeks, see where we're at on value and see where we're at on, the production. And then generally like in the starting kind of 3-4 weeks ago through to now is when I start doing the blow ups. And, sometimes it's not even as much about points as much as it's about like value, or it's just about circumstance or whatever else. Like if you don't have your first, or if you do, but definitely like once I've made the decision, like that we are tanking. Like anything that is on the bench that is like worth a third or less, it's like, give me a third. Okay. Give me a fourth. Okay. No. All right. Dropped. And like anything in the lineup we're getting rid of. Cause like, if I'm doing it, like I want to maximize the value of that tank. So I'm trying to get into 101. I have some spots. Like I had one team that I thought was going to be probably like one of my 10 or 15 best contenders this year. Honestly, it had Saquon, it had Chubb, it had Justin Jefferson. And so like we lose Chubb immediately, we lose Saquon right after that. And we were like kind of battling through for a little bit. And then we lost Jefferson. And I was like, all right, like fuck this.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, like I think like 300 points back of the net of last in points for, maybe 250. And I was thinking like 6. We have cut that down to 70 in like 3 weeks. Like it was like we sold like the entire team. Like that was like the league where I did like we sold Saquon and Herbert together for AR and picks. I sold like Jerome Ford for some picks. We sold like every wide receiver that I had for a pulse for some picks. Like we're not rostering players anymore. So it's go time for some of these.
That's a nice segue. So I another thing that is very notable that I always think of when I think of you as a dynasty player is your general, again, laissez-faire attitude towards running backs. The RTB, run the damn ball handle, and we had a Pollard funeral last night, and it was devastating and sad.
I think I still have a little more hope than you guys. But I'll be the last person to say die on Pollard. So that's why I don't even like talking about him, because like I just know that I'm biased. So
do you think it's just like working his way back healthy? He doesn't look the same.
I don't think that it's a health issue personally. I think that we
agree on Mike McCarthy's team, but like
when Mike McCarthy's team is bad. I legitimately think it's like I legitimately think it's the yips. Like this is like a cancelable take. I wouldn't even tweet it because like people would just be like, "What are you talking about?"
I already love this take. So go ahead.
My take on it, like look, I've watched a lot of Pollard. Like I've watched every single one of his games live, basically for the last 3 years. Like he's one of my favorite players ever. So I do feel like, obviously I don't know him personally or whatever, but you watch an athlete for long enough, I do think you can start to get some sort of read on their body language and just kind of like how they're feeling throughout the game. Yeah. And like, so one of the things I always look for when a running back gets tackled is like what their reaction is right after the tackle. And sometimes you see a running back, like it's like, especially after a good run, if you see a running back get tackled after like a 15 or 20 yard run, usually the reaction is like one of 3 things. Like either it's kind of nothing, or it's like they get up really happy and they do a first down mark, or they like smack the ground because they're like, I can't believe I just got shoestring tackled. I should have housed it. Yeah. And like Pollard has always been that latter, which is like honestly one of the reasons I've always loved him. Like every single run that he gets, you can just kind of tell with his attitude that he thinks should be a touchdown. Yeah. And I remember watching him in week 1, like that was one of the things I looked for on the ankle, was like, does he still have that like belief in himself? And like he got tackled on one of his best runs that game against the Giants, and it was like what he always does, which is like right hand smacks the turf, like looks towards the end zone. I was okay, he's got it. There was a run this week where this is the worst segment in this podcast history because it's just pure speculation. But there was a run this week where like it was one of the best blocked runs they had. It was a draw play. He darts through the middle, and he has like kind of a one-on-one with a linebacker. He like splits between 2 linemen that were hitting their gap block. So they're like a little bit downfield horizontally. And he goes through that, is a one-on-one with a linebacker. And he just kind of like runs into him and just gets tackled. And then he just like doesn't really do anything. Like he just like gets tackled falling forward and just like puts the ball down and like walks back to the huddle. And it's like, oh man, like that's what he thinks he is now. Like that's just like, so that was just tough for me to watch. Like he didn't really, like he executed the play as designed, and he got what was blocked and what he like quote unquote should have, and he got like 8 yards. But to me, like a confident runner, and especially a confident runner with his skill set, is not darting through that hole. They're looking at it. They're saying, yeah, this is well blocked. I'm not in any danger of getting tackled right now. I'm slowing down. I'm going to make a move on this linebacker, and I'm getting into the secondary. And the fact that he didn't do that and then didn't really seem to have like he just wasn't demonstrative enough throughout the game when he was kind of what I thought was missing opportunities. It feels like in his head that he doesn't seem to, whether it's he doesn't trust the ankle or he doesn't trust his blocking or he just doesn't, or whatever it is. It just seems to be the case where he's playing very, very conservatively. And I think that the contract is weighing on him. Like, he's a free agent after this season. I think that the pressure of these years of people doubting whether he can be a number one running back, like I don't know how much players listen to stuff, but I just can't imagine you tune that entirely out. I think he probably wants to show that. And like, I think he put a lot on himself this offseason to be that guy. And you see it, like his pass blocking this year is unreal. He used to be a horrible pass protector. He's had so many impressive pass pro reps. And you look at him kind of just like executing the scheme. I'm just like, I feel like he's just trying to do the right thing all the time, and he's not being creative. And you watch him when he gets outside runs, he's still good. He still has the juice. I'll stop in 1 second. He had like one run against the Chargers. It was after that big catch. He had like the big catch, broke the tackle, runs for 1 million yards, got caught. People got mad. He got caught. I mean, he ran like 100 total yards.
He looked.
The very next play, they give it to him again on a toss play, and he runs outside. It's the first outside run they've given him the entire day. He broke like 3 tackles, like darting towards the sideline. It was like one of the better runs he's had the whole year. And I was like, oh, like there's the juice. It got called back for holding. And you still see that on some of the outside runs. But on the inside runs, like he just doesn't look like he doesn't look like he thinks he can beat guys. Like he's just kind of running into them and trying to fall forward.
All right, so I'm going to kind of pivot off your like galaxy brain take with my own. So everything you just kind of described, like not finishing off runs, just going 3 yards, falling over, being a great pass blocker. Like maybe he thought, okay, they played Wash Zeke over me all those years.
Right. I think he is kind of thinking
the running back one. Now that I'm the running back one, I'm going to keep this role and play just like Wash Zeke. So maybe that's it.
I do think there's something to the idea that he's like, what's important now is like for me to be like reliable and to execute and not to be creative. I feel like he, especially just because I think, I don't know, he doesn't look like he's secure right now, like emotionally and mentally. So I think he needs to hit one.
So I think generally, Jacob, you always speak to volatility of running backs in certain assets anyways, right? So
for sure.
You said you're not quitting him yet. He's not a buy at a depressed value for you? Is it just a hold in terms of like emotional attachment to a certain degree?
No, I'll buy him.
Okay,
I'd buy him. Yeah, I mean, I'll buy anybody. Like I always, this is where we can get into. We're gonna get into some of the market stuff, whatever. I'm sure today, but like. I always hesitate in season with calling guys buys or sells because frankly, like I really couldn't tell you what Tony Pollard's value is right now. So I don't know if I think he's a buy or a sell.
If you could buy him for 2, I have him. Would you?
I would 100% do that. Yeah. So I have him ranked in my late 1 tier. So and late is like where I have him ranked is like kind of not really what I'd buy him for. It's not really what I'd sell him for. It's like what I think is the equilibrium.
I'll tell you, you can buy him a lot in a lot of leagues if you're paying a late 1 right now, just as an FYI.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally like not like I phrase
you're overexposed anyways. Too. Yeah, sure.
I phrase everything in draft pick value because I just think it's easiest to communicate.
Yeah.
In terms of actually how I would sell draft picks for players, like. Draft picks are a finite resource. There's only so many of them you can sell. I usually only have 1, 2, maybe 3, 24 ones on a given team. If it's a contending team, probably 1, 0, or 2. I don't really want to spend those picks making deals that I think are even, right? Like it's just, there's only so many picks you have. If I'm spending one, I probably want to feel like I'm winning the deal. So I'm not going to be going out and offering late ones for Pollard. I wouldn't like necessarily also be super excited to like accept a late one for Pollard if I'm contending. That's just like, to me, like kind of shrug your shoulders-y. But There's players I'm sure that people value at late 1 value that I would move for Pollard. I mean, he's still getting a ton of the snaps. And I still think he's shown enough to me running when he does get outside that I still think he is capable. I don't know. I just keep feeling like all he's going to need is like one of these runs. I feel like, the The path is going to open up and he's going to house it. And I just think he's going to start feeling it again and he's going to get back into a groove. Like I've likened it to pitching before. And I remember my first year playing in AAA when I was pitching. And it was like, when I was feeling confident, it's like we're throwing curveballs that are starting, 2 feet outside the strike zone and coming in because we're just throwing it. Right. And you start walking a couple batters and all of a sudden, all you think of is like, I need to make sure I don't get the hook. And like now you're just aiming pitches. You're not trying anything fun. You're not throwing very hard. And usually you're either just going to throw balls or you're just going to get lit up because you're just trying to not do the wrong thing. Like, especially as someone who like kind of worked his way up through that and really was not like, I kind of see some of that in Pollard where it's like, I don't think that when you are the guy who's like a converted wide receiver, 5th round draft pick, finally gets his chance, I just feel like the mentality is always going to be looking over your shoulder a little bit. And I think that that's concerning when things start not going well, is that you're going to go into a shell.
All right. So again, I think we could go down miles and miles of road and keep talking about this stuff. And it's super interesting to me, but I want to make sure we just kind of keep going. So The last thing I want to talk on in game 3, and that will kind of lead us into our startup and rookie draft that we did and you created. So we definitely want to have time to pick your mind on that front. Your general approach is roster consolidation, right? In terms of like as much elite talent as possible, figure out the rest later, or are you trying to like go depth in a startup or in a starting setting?
Every startup is different, really. And the first thing I kind of try to do when I start a startup is like, who are the people I'm playing with? What do I think they want to do? And generally, I want to try and do the opposite of that. And then beyond that, I kind of look at what are the specific settings of this league that make this league different. And like, that's why I kind of, each time I do a startup, I try to do some sort of wrinkle, whether it be like a funky derby or whether it be like we have this 2024 timeline, or if it's an auction, or if I just choose kind of weird scoring settings or something. Because I kind of want to create something that makes it interesting, where there becomes like a new meta beyond just what we're used to. And then, kind of observe like, how are people reacting to this meta? Are they overreacting to it, where actually the advantage is just playing it closer to straight up, or are they underreacting to it where we really want to lean into it? For me, going into this league, and I assume everybody's already kind of quite familiar with how it was all set up.
Actually, no, Jacob, we have not told the audience really or the listeners about it. So if you want to kind of
give us like a back cover, like 1.5 minute elevator pitch of your craziness that you created. Beautiful craziness.
So the very first time we did a league in this format, it was Habib and I did it it was like with a bunch of our home league buddies like 3 years ago. And it was the exact same week in the season, I believe, or very close to it. And it was in the middle of the 2020 season. So, and what it is, it's a 3-way derby, which is there's a veteran draft, which is everybody currently in the NFL except for rookies. There's a current year rookie draft, so in this case, 2023 rookies, and then a future rookie draft, 2024. 3 separate drafts. And then you split it up with this 3-round derby where you're drafting your draft slot in each of those drafts. And you can do trades within the derby to move up, move down, whatever else. And, you're picking. So first of all, there's kind of a lot of strategy that goes into it off the hop, where like, I don't know how much everybody prepared for, whatever. I can tell you what I did. It's like, I literally went and I added up everybody. I went through and I ranked brand new ranks, obviously, because it's the base only for 2024. There's no 2023 value to the league. So I went through and I re-ranked all the players for 2023 for the rookies, for the vets, and like kind of my estimation of where 2024 picks would fall. And then I just gamed out the slots to base firsts, and then I converted everything in each pick slot into base first above replacement. And then tried to like power rank basically all of the pick slots in terms of what order I'd want to go in. Unfortunately, I thought people picked pretty well this year. Like in the one that we did 3 years ago, people were just doing absurd things. So honestly, I felt like before we even made the first pick in the draft, I felt like I had gained like 2 firsts of value in that draft 3 years ago. I didn't feel that way. I thought there was one like absolutely critical error in the derby, but outside of that, I thought everybody else was like mostly making like either optimal or reasonable choices.
For me, how much prep research I did, it's like that Johnny Manziel thing from a few weeks ago. 0. I did not do any kind of prep or research. I read the scoring settings, obviously. I basically just picked the best soonest pick whenever I was up. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into it.
Which is honestly sharp. You could probably do less harm doing that.
In this setting, how do you define what the best pick is? Like, that's the strategy that comes into play here, right? It's like, do you want to take 24-101, or do you want to take
that was the error? Was that the error?
To me at least, it's like the way I tried to game that out was like, okay, what's 24-101 worth? What's 24-212 worth? What's 24-312 worth?
Yeah.
Whatever. Add it all up. What's 24-112? Add it all up, and you just add it all up for the first 4 rounds of each pick. I didn't go all the way through the vet. Once you get past 4 rounds, it pretty much evens out in the vet round.
Yeah.
I thought that the best pick was the 24-101. That was the conclusion that I came to. I thought people mostly went I thought that the best picks were the 24-101 followed by the top 3 picks in 23. That was what I thought was the clear top 4. I was picking 6th, I think, in the Derby, if I recall correctly. And I ended up getting 103, 2023. I didn't end up picking at the 103, but that was a slot I ended up getting. And I was pretty happy to get that because 2 people took Vet 101 and Vet 102, which I would have been fine with too. But that was probably, that the top 320. I was pretty sad. I really wanted either Caleb or a top 3 2023 rookie pick. The only really poor choice I thought was unfortunately Spence's second pick, where the only 2 picks that, I thought clear. And it's kind of funny because it wouldn't always be 12. I would argue it's I would argue it's not even 12 today based on things that have, already changed. But at that time, I just thought 12 is outrageously kind of bad because there's this weird tier of 11 in both the vet and in the rookie where it really falls off after that. And not that much of a difference between 201 into 23, 24. So that was where I was like, man, I do not want to be 12. So to me, I would have not picked first spot in the Derby because you're locked into basically the 12 hole in one of the drafts in your last pick. And then obviously the really bad error I thought was just voluntarily taking the vet 12, which I thought was the worst pick slot in the hole.
It's funny because you're saying in a normal startup with rookies involved, I like 112 if I'm not getting the top 5, let's say top 5, 6, where you're getting those elite quarterbacks because you are still getting Tyler, Deshaun Watson, or you're getting Anthony Richardson or somebody like that in this past offseason, right? So I get what he was thinking, but it wasn't the same. We weren't doing that draft. So I see why it happened. Yeah.
I thought it was a clear top 3, but honestly, I think the top 3 extends because you're getting this format's very friendly for Burrow and Herbert. It's big on all the pocket passers get a big boost. So to me, that kind of extended out the group that you normally see at the top of startups out through 6, where I thought Burrow and Herbert, to me, my normal opinion is that Burrow and Herbert are demonstrably worse than Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts. And I didn't feel that way necessarily in this startup. I thought that they were all kind of the same tier. And then it was okay, you Jefferson, Chase, your Lawrence. I'm missing someone. Oh, Tua. I mean, Tua got a big assist from the scoring system too. Yeah. And then Kyler, you can get your mileage out of him. I thought he was kind of the clear 111 and kind of a tier of his own. And then, I personally thought massive drop to them. We're getting into wide receivers, but especially when you consider that, I think everybody's wide receiver tier is a little bit different, but for the most part, it kind of extends 4 or 5 guys long. And we see CeeDee Lamb go mid 2, right? Versus I think it's Olave goes 112. It's people are picking.
So we talked about you want to know your fellow managers, right, in the league. And I think a lot of us know each other pretty well in our styles and gameplay. So your approach was talk about vet draft first. We've been kind of thinking
Brian, real quick, let's finish covering some of the other scoring. Jacob said, so there's so you get 0.2 points per completion. You get negative 0.1 for an incompletion, 0.25 points for a passing first down, and you get half point for a rushing and receiving first down, There are like 40-yard touchdown bonuses. Cover anything I missed, guys.
But it's a massive boost for a really good pocket passer that they normally wouldn't have. So that's what you're talking about, Herbert to
the complete.
Like Herbert was specifically a target for me at the 106. I was happy he fell. It's a very friendly setup for him in the sense that he's just always going to be a pretty high completion percentage guy, where he's usually going to get to, people that don't like him always kind of refer to him as a check down artist. And that's fine. And it's like, he's going to throw a ton. Like, it's just what we know about Herbert is he's going to have like, he's the best bet in the entire NFL for like these 40 completions on 50 attempts type of games. Yeah. And so I felt like he was I thought he was the player that honestly was helped out the most by the scoring setting. So I was pretty hopeful to get him at the 1-6. I was happy about that. And then from there, like my kind of overarching strategy for this draft was like, I basically, overarching take, every year, 66% of non-rookies lose value. So to me, the idea was roster as few as possible. It's like, because we're basically in this scenario, and it's hard because you don't want to double count. Like, everybody's already trying to ascribe some level of value loss to a lot of the veterans. So to me, it was like, I think people are going to push up a lot of the younger veterans in this draft quite a bit to where it's borderline uncomfortable. And then I think they're going to probably allow me to look at these veterans to where I'm starting to get tempted. And so to me, basically my goal was like, I don't really want to invest a lot in the fragile group. Like, my hope was I don't really want to be picking in like rounds 4 and 5 and 6. Some of these guys where I thought they were.
So you just traded them to me.
So my goal was basically like, I was like, I want to trade up and I want to see if I can get like 3 guys the top 2 rounds. I didn't end up being successful in that. And then after that, it was like, I want to trade out and just have the flexibility of these picks. Yeah. And the hope being that like, there's going to be some massive hits from the vet draft, but there's going to be, I think, more failures than hits. And so the hope kind of being like, even if I'm not necessarily winning each individual trade in a vacuum, my hope was just on aggregate to like store my value in as secure places as possible, that I would just kind of like maintain while every other roster would just kind of like degrade over the course of the rest of the season is like the way I kind of approached it. So I took like, I would say, a pretty conservative approach in that sense. And the result of it ended up being that I think I did not pick for rounds 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Yep.
Yeah. So you had Herbert, Chase, Hall, just to record that. Those are your big 3, right? That's
So the Chase trade actually happened later. So I started off Herbert and then Hall. Traded up for Hall, and then round 3 I traded out to Matt. That was a really interesting trade. That was where I moved the 3rd round pick. He took Christian McCaffrey. For what it's worth, I was going to take T. Higgins that I picked. So that was a spot where I was actually I was like really excited to pick in the 3rd round, basically until my entire queue went like 7 guys in a row. Like it was, I was like I was first, my hope was like, maybe I'll get Ayuk in the mid-3rd. He ends up going. Then I was like, okay, I guess I'll probably take London. Like, everybody hates London. I'll end up with London. He goes. And then I was like, fine, I'm taking Purdy. And then he goes. So then I was like, hey, I have no fucking clue. Like, either I'm taking T. Higgins, who like I guess is part of this group, but I don't really like, or I'm like taking McCaffrey, which is pretty fun, but also seems fucking terrifying. So at that point, I was like, if I can get like value I'm okay with, I just would really prefer to sit this round out. I think the trade ended up being the 3rd round pick. It was McCaffrey. Yeah. My 5th round pick?
Yeah, actually, I know the trade very well. I'll just say it. So it's your 307, your 507, your 707 for gave to me. I gave you my 23 106, my 2024 109, and my 2024 309. So two firsts and a 3rd.
304.
Yeah.
Oh, because
that's just the entire balance of the trade. I don't 309. I wouldn't even considered it, but the 304 is completely different.
So 2 firsts and a 3rd, and like you were saying, so your strategy makes a lot of sense to me. And you're essentially saying I'm kicking the can value-wise down the road until I know more information about all these guys. I can make a more informed decision in 2024 than I can right now, given the uncertainty of the next couple months. I went basically the complete opposite, which is probably why we did that trade. Like you said, I knew that youth was going to be heavily prioritized. People are going to be terrified that all their old guys are going to get hurt, lose value, etc. And I was totally comfortable just kind of scooping up whatever old guys fell to me at whatever spots. And when the 307 came up, my thinking, and I was pretty transparent with you. You knew exactly I was going for CMC. There was no other guy I was
100%.
considering.
Yeah.
And to me, I said this on Mike's pod, I wanted to take one single home run swing. And to me, that's CMC. If he stays healthy for the next few months, that guy's a league winner. I want him on all of my teams. I had this conversation like a month ago in our group chat. It made you laugh. You're like, yeah, Matt, you're nuts. I was like, I see him playing 3 more years.
He totally could.
I think
like
he's just an all-time generational.
Listen, I've said this countless times at this point on this podcast. He transcends that risk enough because of his point per game and his just overall production that you can. If you're going to stomach it with anybody, it's Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, he was the only
my
guy
take on
that
McCaffrey and my take on Kelsey is the same, which is just like, whenever someone's like, "What do you think they're going to stop being good?" It's like
Just don't know.
For as long as they stay good, I don't expect them to stop being good. Like, so in the micro, it's like for as long as they continue to be good, I expect them to be this good. I just feel like from a macro perspective, like at some point in time, I don't know when, like something like some sort of exogenous event is going to happen and their value will never recover. And so it's it's terrifying to me. But the level of fear in those guys, like entirely related to the value of my team, right? Like I have them on some teams that are loaded where it's like, if Christian McCaffrey snaps his leg tomorrow, and I hope obviously that never happens, like obviously that's a massive blow to my team, but like my team isn't like fucked for multiple years. But I see some teams where it's like they're just these like really low value teams that are propped up by CMC and Kelsey, and I'm like, I couldn't live like that, man. Like to me, that's like you're like going down to the money mart and like taking your pay, like you're like taking your thing, you're like, man, I'll pay 50% interest, like give me the cash now. It's like, man, the thought of having McCaffrey and Kelsey on a low value team is terrifying to me because like one thing happens, you're rebuilding for 3 years.
It's like taking a woman out on a date knowing you have like $60 in your bank account. Like literally nothing can go wrong here and I'll be all right. Like
exactly.
Like if one single thing goes wrong, this is all going to come crashing down. But yeah, no, I definitely hear you.
I think we have the general consensus and idea. Jacob, was there one pick that before we switch over to the rookies, was there one pick in the draft? Can be yours, it can be someone else's that you just absolutely loved or hated. We can get either one.
Give us one of each.
Okay. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Pick that I loved. I mean, I hated it because it happened right before me. Yeah. But probably like certainly the pick that pissed me off the most was the Purdy pick. Like I thought he was really sliding too far, frankly, like in a league with this setup, A, like in terms of how much it benefits pocket quarterbacks, B, with how much you're just like getting a lot of benefit out of taking kind of like youthful, safe assets. Like I don't like Purdy from a real life perspective. I think he's like mostly he's fine. League average to bad-ish quarterback propped up by a Shanahan system, but like it doesn't really matter to me because I don't foresee him. Like he is more than good enough to operate the system at a very high level to the point where I don't see it as an overly high likelihood that they desire to move on from him at any point in time in the near future. And for as long as he's propped up in this system, then I have no concerns. So like to me, the time to worry about trading Purdy is either if he rises so much more in value than he's currently at that you can basically move him for quarterbacks who are just as young or close or just as productive or close that like don't have any of these kind of IRL concerns, or when it's like he has 1 year left on his rookie deal and you're like, I wonder if they like Purdy because he makes so little money or if they like Purdy because he's Brock Purdy. But like that's not a concern to me in the next 2 years. So the next 2 years, like I'm holding all of my Purdies. I'm probably trying to trade for more Purdies. And the only time in which I would get rid of him is like at some point in time, I still think the Dynasty community is going to come to some sort of revelation where they're like, Akash has talked about this before, where there's going to be like a moment of like, what's the difference between Brock Purdy and Tua Tagovailoa anyway?
Yeah.
And at that point in time, I'll be the guy being like, here's all the differences, and I'll pay a second round.
Tua's actually playing
out,
awesome in real life. That's the difference.
Right. But I just like, I feel like I know this Dynasty community, and I just feel like that's coming. And like Purdy is always going to be that guy where like, I guarantee you this offseason, the one that I know for sure is happening is there's going to be the player A, player B with Brock Purdy and with Trevor Lawrence. And people are going to be like, why do we like Trevor Lawrence more? And I just think he's going to be such a useful stepping stone to get to the true elites that like trading him now just seems like a silly move. So him going in round 3 was great. I was like legitimately fucking excited to take Brock Purdy in the 3rd round. And I was very upset that went.
So that is a good / bad pick. I like that. That's efficiency right there. Okay. Was there anything that jumped out at you where you're just like, what was that person doing?
Yeah, I think that, everybody takes a different approach to the idea of like, we have all this time. But like, I'm going to hit on my guy Dusty here, where like he took the heart attack team. Like every single player that he took was like, and I don't even want to pick one specific one because I think like it's almost a lock that whichever one I pick is going to be the one that becomes a home run, and then I'm going to look like a fool.
Fields, JMO, a bunch of guys like that.
For the record, like so it went ETN round 2, then Fields, then Swift, then Howell, then Jamison Williams. It's like that is like that's like riding on like a motorcycle on top of a 100-foot tall bridge that is like just like a piece of rope while doing cocaine. Like with lava underneath. We're just like. So, I mean, I think it's like kind of. I think it's borderline fun as a strategy in the sense that you get to basically just be like, look, we're going to see how this works out. If I hit on more bets than not, then I'm going to have a sick team. And if I don't, then I'm year 1 tanking, I guess, is probably the approach. And that's not the worst approach. So maybe I'm talking myself into this, and I just kind of wanted to talk about it because I thought it was interesting, and I guess I didn't think anyone had like a particularly bad draft. But I think if there is one draft that's like most likely to lag way behind, it's probably that one if some of those picks go badly. I think Spence had a tough one, but I don't think that was anything that he did wrong with his actual picks. I think it was just a tough run through the Derby.
I think it's important to stress, and I want people to get out of their comfort zones, and especially in the off season, in the startups and drafts that they do, and like figure out these different strategies because there is so much like different game theory that goes into this. And I think Jacob's a great person and resource for this, that he just like creates these elaborate, I don't know how it's just like muses of just like chaos that everyone like is confused, but also is like feels like they're super high and excited doing. So something to think about. Vet draft. Okay, so wrapping vet draft, was hop over to the rookie draft because I think this is what really I think a lot of people are probably super interested in.
Talk about Puka.
And, we'll get into Puka. I'm sure he'll be mentioned here pretty soon. But
I don't think the Puka pick is as egregious in the rookie draft as the discussion about Puka afterwards, I guess. But yeah.
Rude. So first I'm just gonna run through the first round just so people can kind of get a feeler, and then I have a couple questions. I've heard it from Matt, but Jacob, I want to hear your takes, and then we can comment after that, Matt. Right? So starting 101, Bijan, Stroud 2nd, Anthony Richardson 3rd, Puka 4th, Achane 5th, Laporta 6th, JSN 7th, Young 8th. Gibbs 9th, that was Jacob. Zay Flowers 10, Jordan Addison 11, and then Dalton Kincaid rounding out 12. So I think there's a couple things that I really want to touch on here. And Matt and Mike kind of opened my eyes to this one. Jacob, if you're sitting 101 and trading back is not an option in this format, are you taking Bijan? Are you taking one of the quarterbacks? You're taking Bijan.
Yeah, I'm taking Bijan Robinson. I do think it's not a big gap, for sure, but I would ultimately take Bijan Robinson. I think, we haven't seen it so far. Arthur Smith, we always have Arthur Smith to thank for some of these things, but I think like just if you watch him and you just like have a good idea of what running backs score like, especially ones with that level of involvement in the passing game and with that level of rushing ability and size, like he's going to be a 20 plus point per game running back for I think several seasons. And so I think the odds is that he's just going to be like straight up outscoring CJ Stroud. So I think sometimes people get into this, kind of super flex mentality where
even in this
start thinking about I do think even in this format that he's probably going to be like, if you give me Stroud versus Bijan Robinson points per game next year, even in this juiced up format, I would back Robinson for that. So I think that's probably where I'm at with it. Is like sometimes you get into these super flex scenarios where it's like how high do you draft the quarterbacks? And especially when you talk about like certain leagues that are not like this, where it's like 4-point touchdown leagues, and you'll see like Trevor Lawrence go really high, or you'll see some of these guys go really high. And it's like, if you think about it, like literally nothing about your league was different. Nothing about your team is different, but you can either play Jamar Chase in Superflex, like as your Superflex option, or Trevor Lawrence in your Superflex option. Like Jamar Chase is just going to score more points. So like he may as well just be a quarterback.
But
that's kind of where I'm at with.
But that does not
go
apply
on too much of a tangent here.
Hold on, that does not apply to Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson will outscore Bijan while healthy.
Yes, I agree with that. So I think it's a matter of like Stroud, you get the longevity for sure. I don't have any questions about him, talent perspective wise. But I do think Bijan Robinson probably scores more points. And like to be clear, like a running back who's straight up outscoring a quarterback is scoring more points above replacement by like a pretty considerable margin.
Yeah.
And then the Richardson Bijan thing is like, Richardson is going to probably outscore him in this format. I would just say like I'm just more secure about Bijan as an asset. Like I love Richardson and I'm a total homer for him. I'm pumped for the Colts future. I would not classify him as like a zero risk asset. He has literally finished 0 games.
So
that's an issue, but
we're not going to talk about that here. That's not the time for this.
So it would be Bijan, but I do think it's very close, and I do think it's like that. Those top 3 are clear cut above the rest.
So
I picked
like the Chris Farley thing, but you can imagine what it'd be like if he did, right? Like
it's true.
I'm
indifferent. I'm indifferent enough. Yeah, Anthony Richardson, by the way, this year's first in fantasy points per dropback. So I know people that love my per route numbers just wait for first in fantasy points per dropback. This, like, interestingly enough, I originally had the 3rd overall pick, so this was probably my most. If either the Matt trade was the biggest or this one was the biggest, but I traded with Gabe. I originally had 103, and I picked 103 with 102 available. Lindsay took 101. I looked at it, I was like, these 3 guys, I don't really care. I think Lindsay's going to go Bijan. I especially don't really care that much between Stroud and Richardson. I'll take the 103 and just the earlier picks, and I'll just kind of see what happens. And then anyway, so basically, I guess it would have been Richardson just based on how the draft turned out. So it ended up being that I traded Richardson and it actually was James Cook, because I actually did draft in the slot, and then Gabe sent me the trade right afterwards for James Cook. So both of us would have taken James Cook for Jamar Chase and the pick the next round, which ended up being Jahan Dotson. So like pretty close to a Chase for Richardson straight up trade in my mind. And it was like, when I was on the clock there, it was Cook, and my next pick would have been Dotson. Those were the 2 I was between. I ended up taking Dotson anyway.
So we talked about it like in rookie season. It was pretty much in like the off season. It was 101 and then a tier of like 5 guys depending on your preferences, right? So we're kind of we've talked about the tiers, and it's kind of more of established top 3 now. So we agree there.
Certainly.
Yeah. So let's move on and like get into maybe some more exciting stuff here. And the 4, 5, 6 range. These are all guys that were definitely not being drafted here at all in the offseason. So that's Puka at 4, HN at 5, Laporta at 6. What are we dealing with 4, 5, 6?
This was fun because I again did the thing where I thought I was trading for the back of what I thought was the tier. So when I trade for the 106, and going into the rookie draft day, I still had the 106. I had to kind of represent a little bit when I was talking in the trade with Matt, because his perspective was not that dissimilar to mine, where he thought HN and Laporta were kind of the clear 4 or 5, And I had to be like, well, I don't think they're going to be there at the 6. And I was telling the truth when I said that. I was really surprised that Puka went at the 4. What I didn't really say was I was like, I would be just as happy with Bryce Young as with either of those guys. And so I kind of penciled Bryce Young in as my 106, basically ever since I had made that trade, which is part of why I did the Chase trade, because I was like, I'm probably going to already have Herbert and Bryce, so I don't really need Richardson as well. We see Puka go at 4, which was interesting. And I was pretty sure Laporta wouldn't go because I think he had Hawkinson, right? I'm pretty sure that Nick at 104 had Hawkinson. So I was like, that's probably Achane, or, I mean, in my mind, it was Achane or Gibbs. I didn't really think that he was going to take a wide receiver. I guess I had not been fully woke to the extent of the Puka love in the universe at that time. So that's on me. But he goes. Mm-hmm. Then Achane goes. And yeah, then 106 was like, I actually don't know who to take, because I had taken like Carr really late in the vet draft as like a just in case I don't take a quarterback in the rookie draft kind of move. And then I was like, I don't have a tight end. Like, this actually be pretty perfect to take Laporta. So I was probably going to take Laporta at that pick. And then a guy traded up. Fun little knowing your league mates thing. I was like, I'm willing. Basically, I viewed it at this point. I was like, you know what? Laporta, Gibbs, and Bryce are all about the same to me. And no one had talked about Bryce all day. We've been talking about this rookie draft for like 2 days. Nobody mentioned Bryce Young's name. Everybody was talking about Gibbs. They're talking about JSN. Talking about Puka. So in my mind, I'm like, I think Bryce might just come to 109. He has like no heat on him. So why don't I just move back again? I think I got like the 301 and 24, and I got like a move up from 2-3 to 112 in 2024. And to me, it was kind of neutral. He takes Laporta. And the one thing I was pretty convinced of is I was like, if I know Brian, JSN's going at the 1-7, and that's the only guy I don't want. So I was like, I'm pretty sure that I'm getting one of my 3 because I think JSN's going in front of me, and he did. And then Mike took Bryce, and so then we took Gibbs, which I was like a little sad I didn't get Bryce at the time. I'm pretty pumped about Gibbs right now. Yeah, it was an interesting stuff. What shocked me was how many people were willing to trade up, because I thought it was pretty freaking flat. And it really surprised me that 2 people were willing to trade up. Gabe from 108 to 105 for Achane. And then what had traded with me from 109 to 106 for Laporta, where I thought that it was pretty darn flat. But to have 2 people I think are pretty sharp be like, no, I'm putting my line in the sand. I'm taking my guy. That was interesting to me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I was shocked that there were trade ups. Like after the top 3, if there wasn't anything, I thought we were going to just kind of be like a boom, 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 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and all of a sudden, then that next tier of decision making comes into play. One thing I do want to touch on. So, for context, we did this rookie draft, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was definitely before the first Addison Pop game, right? So I take JSN 7. I still think I'd like to tell myself that I'd still take him 7. Well, Gibbs would be in play for sure, but I definitely wasn't going to ever take Young. Just in terms of context, I have 103 in 2024, so I kind of have that penciled in as like a pretty strong quarterback or Marvin Harrison Jr. Situation. So just context, sometimes that matters, but I wanted to kind of talk on some hot names lately. So since we've done this rookie draft,
me and Jacob are so mad that we passed on Will Levis in the second round. I'm like, I'm despondent. I had my 210 tagged as my Levis pick the whole time.
So if we do this rookie draft tonight, same group,
I would take Levis 112.
Yeah. That's where you're at it. Okay, Matt.
I have Will Levis 47th overall, and so in my dynasty rankings, I have 44, 45, 46, and 47 overall in a row are Addison, Flowers, JSN, Levis.
So Brian, you were going to say where would I take Levis? I'm looking at the board right now. I know this is going to be kind of maybe a hot take, but you guys know I've never been that impressed with what I've seen from Bryce Young. I'm taking Will Levis over Bryce Young, though.
Wow.
I would probably put and I'm taking Will Levis over Zay Flowers. I don't know if I'm taking him over Addison. So I think I'd have him like around 109, 110 right now.
Yeah, basically, once we get past the players that I'm like extremely sure are good and meaningful, I think I'm taking Levis. I was just I made like a list of my mind. It was basically like players I think could be superstars, players I know are good, and then other players. And like Will Levis was at the top of my other players list in terms of like the speculative bet. And again, we did this before he ever started the game. We did this before he was even announced as the starter.
Yeah.
There were, like we were still like kind of wondering, is like Willis going to start? And like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's funny when we did this draft 3 years ago. I specifically took, I can't even remember. I think some total bum in the third round, probably a bum. And I remember that was at the time when I was like, I wonder if Jalen Hurts would be a fun upside swing. This was before he ever took over for Wentz. And I took like some total bum. Oh, you know what it was? It was Donovan Peoples-Jones. Donovan Peoples-Jones.
Of course it was. Yes.
And then like 2 picks later, I was back on the clock and Hurts was still there. And I was like, oh, thank God. And then I took Hurts. And that obviously became a smash. And this time, I guess I had fond memories. And I remember I was sitting there at the 210. I had Marvin Mims, I think ranked like 206 or something. And he was the last of the players that I was like in my good players tier. And I was like, okay, I have Levis ranked behind Mims, but he's like clearly the home run swing. Maybe I should just take it now. But then I kind of looked and I was like, like everybody thinks Levis sucks. Like I bet I could potentially either trade back up and grab him, or I could maybe like sneak this around to like the 304 where my next pick was. And I was like, I'm like, I'm sure Mims isn't going to fall because I feel like he has a more like universal how people feel about him versus like Levis at the time was, I think, 70% of the community are just like, this guy's garbage forever. And then I even tried when I was on the clock. I offered a trade to Jake while I was on the clock so that I could have 210 and 211. He was like, no. Then I offered him another trade. He was like, no. And then he snap picked Levis. And I was like, fuck. Like, he got me. So I immediately regretted it. Before he even played, I was like, I should have clearly.
This is kind of, it's a perfect lead into kind of what I wanted to get at. And one of the picks that when we went on Mike's podcast, Matt, all three of us kind of agreed. And this is not me tooting my own horn now because in hindsight, it's not as good of a pick. But Tajay Spears at 205. Everyone was like, oh, good pick, good, or 206. Okay, sorry. Good was applauded as generally a good pick. That was, we thought maybe Derrick Henry's moving out of town. We're not sure what the hell Tennessee is doing with their quarterback. So it's interesting to me to think that we're talking about the market or perceptions not changing as much, but like situations can kind of drive things in different directions, right? So like if this draft is happening, I'm smashing drafting Levis obviously at 206. But it's interesting to me that like that is a good pick 2 weeks ago, and now I'm like, shit, I missed out on potentially this like back end QB1, high upside guy.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I've never really been as into Spears as other people. And I thought it was like a good pick from like a theoretical sense. It wasn't the top of my board. I wish for everything that Matt had not taken fucking Pop Douglas. And I wish that you had taken like anyone else because then Mims probably goes.
I would have taken Musgrave. I would have.
Right. So if you take Musgrave, then whatever goof took Musgrave, like probably. If someone, I just needed one
right after me.
There was basically 3 picks that I had no interest in over Levis, which was Johnson, Douglas, and Musgrave that all went in a row. And had like any one of those players taken Mims, then I would definitely have Will Levis, and then I would be so much happier right now. And so I blame myself most of all. I blame myself 95%, but I 5% blame the Nick, Matt, and Mike for taking the players I didn't want, so that the player that I did want, but in hindsight, wish I didn't have, fell to me.
I think it's so funny that in 2 weeks' time we can be like everyone was feeling good about like Matt was super happy about taking Pop. I was super happy about Spears. This person was happy about that. Like Levis wasn't talked about until this past week, and it's like we all. Well,
I was demonstrative the second he got picked. To be clear, like I mean, I can't like be like I was smart because I didn't take him.
Yeah,
I
no, you said in the
like the second in the chat, like that Jake took him. I was like, I would give anything to go back in time. Like I purely did it because I hoped he would get to me like a demo.
Yeah. But my point, all three of us, if 201, if we're doing this redraft, if 201 rolls around and he's not picked yet, all three of us are racing to trade up for Levis now. That's the interesting. I guess
I already would. He's not making it to 201. I would have already.
I mean, I wish we had. I really wish that we had done this draft now, because I picked at the 205, and I had to pick kind of like. I like Tank Dell, but I felt like I had to pick like right after a bunch of people that I was really interested in went, where it was like
man, Tank Dell's really good, man.
I like Tank Dell a lot, but like I was really hoping for one of Rice, Mayer, or Downs, and then they all kind of go out in a row. And like, now if Levis is in that mix, like I'm definitely picking one of Rice, Mayer, or Downs. Like if you just do the math, they get the 205 easily, or I get Levis somehow. But I bought Levis 3 times this week at least, so I'm slowly but surely drowning my sorrows.
I love. I said this in our group chat. It really was one of like the few moments that I literally laughed out loud in our group chat. Where like me and you had the same idea. I was going hot for Levis after that debut. I'm going aggressively. I'm throwing a mid to late 1 out there. That's the type of stuff. And so you said, I'm definitely trying to buy Levis right now. And someone's like, what do you?
I think Brian said, "What are you trying to buy for?"
Yeah.
What I said it's not in my financial interest to disclose that information.
I was like, but it had me thinking, because I do. Not to steam you up too much, but I do respect you as one of the smartest Dynasty players that I play with. So it was kind of cool to me. I was like, man, me and him have the same fucking idea this morning. Like we're not really talking about what we're offering, even with our closest friends, and we're going to try and buy some Levis right now.
Quick story. So before we were recording yesterday's podcast, Matt came in, we're doing a quick meeting or whatever, and he was just like, "Guys, you cool with if I just like swear a bunch here? Like, I'm pretty excited about something." We're like, "Yeah, dude, go for it." And it was genuinely one of the funniest things I've ever seen. It was just like, man, it was just like out of nowhere. It was just like, "Will, he's fucking awesome." Like that was just like, it was just like demonstratively like, yes, I don't care about anything else. He's fucking awesome.
I laughed so hard listening to that, because I was on the show, I think basically at the same time. We had Scott Barrett on Full Tilt last night, and Tom did kind of the exact same setup that Brian did, which is like, you do like the host thing where you're like, Will Levis had a great game, but some people aren't so sure. Why do you like Will Levis? And like the first thing I was like, because he's fucking dope. And then I just kept doing this with like my hand, like, and I'm, for the audio listeners, I'm making a wrist flicking motion. I just kept doing that for like the next 20 minutes. Like as anybody would make a point, like, oh, a success rate. I was just like doing this.
So the other line that I like to use is that one play where he's fading back to his right, takes it off his back foot and just flicks his wrist 60 whatever yards downfield, perfectly on target touchdown. That throw alone was worth a first round pick. Like, so I was like, you know what? Fuck it. Like, let's go get some
QB school loved him. Like all the negative plays that he had were explained for this reason or that reason. It was like, I'm on board with you guys. It was just so funny to me. And then hearing your story, Jacob, that it's literally just like you guys were like living in these like alternate universes, like living the exact same life. It's just
saying
like
the same thing,
Will Levis centric life. Yeah, it's so funny.
I mean, look, there's very few things we know about the quarterback position. We know that upside in fantasy football, like true elite upside in fantasy football, mostly comes from athletic traits. Do you run and do you throw deep? That's like the two things that drive the difference between 18 point per game scores and 22 point per game scores. We know that we're pretty bad at scouting quarterback position generally. Like we can have takes about which quarterbacks are more or less likely to be good. And I should say, and when I say we, I mostly refer to like the dynasty driven or data driven dynasty community, like of all of the positions, obviously data driven scouting is very fallible at every position, but like quarterback more than any of them, really.
Literally everybody is bad at scouting quarterbacks, including even those who are paid to do it for a living nonstop 365 days a year.
Right. So my attitude with quarterback takes is it's like I'll have them, but I'm very, very willing to shift off of them. Like it's like if I look, I thought Will Levis was gonna suck it up out there. Like I have 10 DeAndre Hopkins shares and I benched 8 of them. And if I could have benched all 10 of them, I would have. Like I was losing my mind with DeAndre Hopkins on my bench in all of these leagues because I was like, I don't think Will Levis is going to move the fucking ball. Like I think this is going to be a shit show. I mean, I was picturing those Malik Willis starts last year where Vrabel was just like, we don't trust this idiot kid. We're going to run the ball 50 times. You can throw 11 passes. Good luck completing 4 of them. Like, that's what I had in my mind. And I was picturing Hopkins catching like 1 ball for 4 yards. And then, I mean, even above how well he played, like, do you remember those Willis games last year? Just how ridiculous the game plan was? Like, it was like, hey, kid, like, go in the corner and play with your toys while the big boys try to win a football game in spite of you. Like, they just, even if he had played well, the signal was so clear from the staff that they were just like, whatever we saw out of you in practice, like, you don't have it. And they basically put him on the Tony DeVito plan. Whereas with Will Levis, the entire game plan was catered around what he does well, right? It's like he's not really an intermediate passer from college, and he struggles under pressure. And so he
struggled with those passes in his debut against Atlanta.
Absolutely. So they look at it and it's like, what do you do well? You throw deep well, right? So they're like, we're gonna run the ball, but we're not gonna play like, total small ball day. We're gonna run the ball, and then we're gonna do these max protect play action shot plays out of the run so that we are able to establish a pocket so that hopefully you have a little bit more time to throw because pressure is an issue for him. And we're going to take advantage of your arm talent. We're going to give you 5 or 6 shot plays to go sling it. And he did. I mean, 2 of the throws were like 2 of the best throws this entire NFL season. The touchdown to Nick Westbrook-Akine or Akine or whatever the fuck. Like when he does the big like roll out to his right, throw back to his left. That was insane.
Unreal.
That was like one of those combine throws against air when everybody's like, oh my God, like, can you believe what he just did in basketball shorts? Like, he just did that in an NFL game.
One of his best throws of the game was an incompletion to the sideline where the guy didn't catch it. But go ahead.
That was the one I was going to bring up next, was that play. And that was his first of the deep passes for the game. And it was like a 65-yard toss if you consider the angle that he threw it at. He put it directly in Burks' hands, who stone dropped it because, it's not very good. But it was an unreal toss. We'll see. The only thing that's like, I'm expecting to double my Levis exposure this next week. I do think he's going to have some struggles against Pittsburgh. I think it's a tough matchup for him where it's kind of the opposite of Atlanta. Atlanta's a pretty decent defense, but they don't have a very imposing pass rush. They have like a good run defense, and they have a pretty good secondary.
They have a good secondary. Yeah.
But
Atlanta's safety got absolutely dragged. He got dragged in the film breakdown of QB. Like it was unreal. Like he was like 23. Oh, he's 6 yards out of position. He's 10 yards out.
I'm just thinking he didn't respect Levis at all. Was my take.
Yeah, it was 100%. It was 100% what happened because like they were expecting like training wheel passes, and they were doing double and triple routes. Like he's doing like full pump fakes, like you're like in high school gym class. Like it was unreal.
He looked like the asshole guy in a co-ed softball league who like the girl comes up and it's like, everybody move up. Everybody move up. And then the girl like launches it over his head and he's like, fuck, I gotta go run the back. Like that was their safety. This week is interesting because Pittsburgh secondary is not that great, but what they do have is like 2 of the top 10 pass defensive linemen in the league in TJ Watt and now a fully healthy and returning Cam Hayward. And Tennessee's offensive line is not that good. And Alex Highsmith. So Will Levis is going to be dealing with pressure. And that's going to be interesting because that was the number 1 mark against him, in my opinion, coming out of college, was like you watch him with a clean pocket and he throws an incredible ball. He gets pressure and he starts to completely discombobulate and do insane things. So as a person who still doesn't have that much Levis, I bought 3 shares, but I was basically working from none because like I was taking Achane and Laporte over him in rookie drafts and Mayer. I want to be getting more Levis now. So I'm personally hoping that TJ Watt daddies him on prime time and that people are like, oh, it's just people just return to priors. It's just a blip. I got to get out now. Because honestly, I have him at, I think, base 1 value right now.
Yeah.
Like maybe if he has the worst possible performance, I could move him down to late 1 value, but I'm not moving him below late 1 value. Like no matter what for the next like month, honestly, just because I've already seen enough in terms of the traits that I'm interested, and he's going to start next year. Like the Titans aren't quite bad enough to get into the total shit show, and they invested the 2nd pick of the 2nd round in him. So from a value perspective, his worst case scenario trade value wise this offseason is probably like the Sam Howell, Desmond Ridder early 2 type value from this past offseason. And his best case scenario value wise is in 4 weeks, we're like, oh, it's Justin Herbert again, and he's worth like 3 firsts. So,
and so the reason that I wanted to quickly move really quickly this week, I'm in 18 leagues. I had 0 shares of Will Levis. I had 0 FOMO about having 0 shares of Will Levis until his debut. And then I was like, oh shit. And then I really quick got 2 shares. So I got him in 2 out of 18 leagues. Now I think that's like about at market. And I'm like, okay, I'm not under market on Will Levis anymore. That feels a lot better. And the interesting thing to me is, we play with a lot of smart people throughout various leagues, etc. Every single person that I've talked to about Will Levis this week has mentioned the Pittsburgh matchup, has mentioned how bad it is for him. It's a Thursday night game. Those are usually ugly anyway. It's more likely than not he has a pretty bad game this week. But everyone's factoring that in already. So if he has a good game, you cannot trade for this guy a week from now, really. Like you're going to have to pay 2 firsts if he has a good game, not even a great game. So I wanted to try and get in now while the price is there.
I think he's similar. Like you can start thinking about in terms of like growth potential, similar to like CJ Stroud after the first couple of weeks where everyone was like, oh, he might be kind of good. And then all of a sudden it was like he had a pop game or 2 and everyone was like, oh, he is elite. And it could go the other way for him, obviously, for Levis, but I'm on board with you guys. I'm trying to acquire him. I don't know if I'm going to be successful.
Could go the Jordan Love route. A great debut, and then just every week he gets worse. So
it could. I will say this is, I believe, Will Levis's PFF grade in this game was higher than any game of Will Levis or any game of Jordan Love's season. I think it would have been the 2nd highest grade of any of Justin Fields' games this season. I already have. So in terms of quarterback dynasty rankings, I mentioned 47th overall. I have him ahead of Justin Fields in dynasty. I have him still behind Bryce Young, but Will Levis is in the mirror closer than they appear. I'll put it that way. Like if he has a good game on Thursday, that's getting changed probably. I mean, I just did a trade. I thought it was like kind of a gift. But the trade was.
I know what you're going to say. It was a gift. Go ahead.
the trade that I just got was we did Cooper Kupp, Tony Pollard, Matt Stafford, Marquise Brown, and Leonard Fournette for Will Levis, Ken Walker, Stephon Diggs, and a 25-2. And my take is that we got the 3 best assets in the deal.
Home run.
I have Will Levis 2 spots out of Cooper Kupp in my ranks.
So it's funny. I actually went to Ken Walker and Cooper Kupp first. But I hate just having high value running backs on my team. I don't trust them.
Well, I have Walker 43rd, Levis 47th, and Kupp 49th. So
okay, yeah, that's fair. I think that's all fair. Yeah. But yeah, man, that trade was a home run for you.
Sick.
The other guy really liked Pollard, really liked Kupp, really liked Hollywood. Like it's one of those things where that I'm not sure that's an actionable trade, really. Like
I think people might be getting excited about Hollywood.
Not only for the many pieces involved, but like most people aren't just like Levis, Diggs, and Walker for this pile of mid and Cooper Kupp, who's great. But
that was fun. Yeah, maybe it is interesting though. People are, I think, getting excited about Hollywood. Like we had a deal that was, it was just kind of sitting in the inbox. I keep saying we because it's a co-managed team. I'm not using the royal we in this case. We had an offer for Holly. We're basically blowing up our team at this point. We just had some injuries pop up, and our team is like 7-9 or something. We already have an extra first this year. And we had an offer in our inbox to send out Debo and Hollywood for a like mid to late 24-1 and 25-2, which we were kind of just like humming and hawing over. And then we ended up getting this other deal done. And then I messaged the other guy back and I was like, oh, like I would still do, Debo for the 1 and maybe we can work on that or whatever. And he was like, oh, I was actually a lot more into Hollywood than Debo. And then, you pair that with the deal that just went through, Kyler coming back, maybe people are getting pumped about Hollywood Brown again for the first time in a long time.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. In the offseason, I remember asking the group chat, like, because I've been higher on Debo than almost everyone in the group chat, like, for the last couple of years.
I actually have a lot of Debo shares.
Yeah, I mean,
I had a lot of Debo shares until I looked.
But you were kind of one of the people that originally changed my mind after his like super breakout season, when everybody said like, hey, you know, a lot of that rushing role, et cetera, is going to go away. And you're like, yeah, you know what's not going to go away? He's literally one of the best playmakers in the NFL, and he still is right now.
And my point was like,
Debo,
yeah.
Debo and Hollywood, they were valued pretty similarly over the offseason. And, you know, Debo started getting hot, and then he got hurt like he always does. So, like, I can see why he lost some luster.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think he's probably a pretty good buy right now. People are worried about him. I think that the Ayuk ascension is like legitimate cause for concern too. But I mean, Debo's really good at football.
I'll say it's not like he's the MVP of the team. I'm not going to go nuts, but there's a reason that they're 0-3 without him. And
yeah, absolutely.
That offense does not work the same without Debo Samuel. But that's just my quick. Debo's awesome.
100%.
Get us back on track.
You got to work that in each week. So rounds 2 through 4, what was a pick that you just really didn't get at all in that rookie pick? Like, why, with all the data that we in theory have through half the season, why did this guy get picked?
Don't say teabag.
Yeah, this is within the rookie draft, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Rounds 3 and 4.
Just 3 and 4,
or 2 through 4. I'm sorry,
2 through 4. Yeah.
I mean, there's no bad picks really once you get to the third round.
Pop Douglas.
Any bad picks? Yeah, I mean, probably has to be Douglas.
That's fair.
And I think like it's not like an egregious pick. Like I think is a pretty good player, and he's going to have value. And like I bet you're probably wouldn't be surprised if you're starting him in the flex next year. I do think the like what do you win when you win factor is pretty limited on a Patriot slot receiver. So like I think when you're taking when you take Demario Douglas, like it's a pretty, I would say it's an absolute lock that in the 5 to 6 picks directly after him, there will be a couple that are worse, but I would say it's like very certain that there will be like a few that it's like, oh, that was way better. Also, like I just think it's a pretty tight band pick to go with Demario Douglas there, but maybe I'm missing the ceiling. I still have like, I don't know how many. I'm going to pull up my Demario Douglas exposure right now.
Every single person in our group chat is overweight on Pop because they got him in all the leagues that we're not in together and stuff.
Yeah, I have 11, and I'm not like part of this Douglas Truther Brigade. It was just like you and Jake and Mike were like always talking about him so much that I was like, well, I don't have him in any of these leagues, but I guess I'll add him in all my other leagues with these people who like aren't subjected to Demario Douglas propaganda. And thank God. I mean,
That's exactly where I'm at.
I spent like 30 minutes one night being like, fine. I can't take this if they're right and I have 0. So I'm just going to like go to Dynasty Planet, go to player status checker. What's all the leagues Demario's in a free agent still? Fine. Okay, I'll add him in all of those. And then thank the Lord.
Yeah, so I mean, that a lot of my pop love came down to I really trust Mike, our friend Dynasty Zoltan, when it comes to scouting wide receivers specifically. I messaged him after week 1. And I was like, look, man, I already am at 62% pop. So you can just be honest with me. Is this guy a meme or like, is he legit? And he just went through like an assortment of things that he really likes about pop. And he's like, Mike is not really like a hot take hyperbole guy.
No, not at all.
And he was like, yeah, this guy's going to like, I'm not certain of this, but I see this guy having multiple 80 catch seasons. I'm like, Jesus, really? Like, okay, yes, I love pop now. I guess I'm going to keep all my 62% until like I can sell for like an early 2 or whatever.
I mean, 1.92 yards per route run and a 26% targets per route run is like absolutely legit. He's like legitimately impressive. I did move a share because I had to use him in a Will Levis transaction this week. But for the most part, originally when he popped as a thing, I was like, oh man, I can't wait to shove this guy in trades and unload these Demario Douglas shares. And now it's like, I mean, I still will definitely include him if asked to. But my like first offer is no longer going to be like, and take Demario Douglas. How about that? Like, I actually do like kind of value him a little bit.
Yeah, it's funny how that works, right? That you just like give a throw in, and it's all of a sudden that throw in guy is someone that like you're a little more connected to. That like this guy has shown promise, and it's not a bad problem to have, Jacob. So like I'm not necessarily gonna knock you there.
75.9 receiving grade, by the way. So for those keeping track at home, the quote unquote magic eraser, which is basically any player that hits 2.0 yards per route run and a 78 plus PFF grade, like they all just become great, almost regardless of how those things were compiled and what day they were drafted on and all of those things. Like
they need 200 routes minimum, right?
And 200 routes,
okay.
Yeah. So but he'll get there. He's at he is how many? He's at 118. So if he plays the rest of the season in a full role, he's pacing for 200 routes. If you do that, like it's varying levels of good. Like there's Terry McLaurin's on that list, for instance, where it's like, oh, great career or whatever. Doug Baldwin is on that list, for instance. And then there's like absolute superstars, right? But basically, like if you get onto that list, if you're not at least Terry McLaurin, Doug Baldwin good, you would be the new worst player to hit the magic eraser mark. So we're within shouting distance. He's like 0.08 yards per route run and 2 points of PFF grading from hitting that, which is entirely within range for him. It's like pretty exciting where, and I get that, like, look, this is like a rigid cutoff. I'm not saying that we should like value him entirely differently based on if he's at a 77.9 or a 78.1.
Yeah.
I'm purely just using those metrics to paint a picture in the sense of for a day 3 guy with a kind of limited role, he's been productive enough to the point where we almost want to start flipping the burden of proof, where it's no longer is this guy real? It's like how real and how far should we go with it? But he's not valued anything close to that, right? So I would actually, honestly, I would probably be going out and buying Demario Douglas right now. I'm talking myself into this at the moment. I need to go send some offers for him.
I'm at 62%. So if you want to talk, I mean, I can ship a Douglas out or two.
Yeah.
All right. So Pop Douglas, I think, is a fitting way for us to lead this conversation. So, Jacob, was there anything else that you wanted to touch on? Were there any grievances that you wanted to air out? Is there anything that you want to apologize for, maybe from earlier? Any of that stuff? Is there any of that out there?
Yeah. Can we talk about this Puka and Nacua thing? I mean, okay, so to be very clear, all that stuff I was talking about, all these all these very bullish numbers for Pop Douglas, to be clear, like Puka is absolutely smashing all of those. So
what's his PFF grade though? By the way, I don't know that.
I don't have the exact. Let me just pull it up. I'll have it in 1 second. 83.7. He's killing.
Oh wow! All right,
killing the game. 83.7 is yards per route run. It's off the charts. So definitely legitimately excited about Puka Nacua. Like he is absolutely a player. It's just an interesting spot where, by the way, Rashee Rice is currently over those marks. He's at 79.2 and over 2 yards per route run. I think he's one of the best buys possible. Anyway, Puka Nacua. The interesting thing about Puka is like he has obviously been incredibly great. But the one thing that you can't say is that with most of these like unlikely breakouts, the price in year 1 almost always reflects a like, is this guy for real type price. Yeah. And in Puka's, it just straight up doesn't. Like it's just way beyond that at this point. And I get the reasons why. And it's interesting because I honestly view him like pretty similarly to how I viewed Amon-Ra St. Brown off his rookie year. But just the difference in how he's been perceived is so vast, where like I was the high guy in every Amon-Ra St. Brown conversation, coming into the offseason that year. Whereas now I'm sort of this Puka hater. To be clear, like I had Amon-Ra St. Brown. I checked because someone found a receipt. I had Amon-Ra St. Brown ranked wide receiver 21 off of his rookie season in Dynasty. And that was clearly too low. It was also good enough to make him one of my highest owned players.
Yeah, I was going to say he was in the 30s around that time, right? Like 35.
Right.
Yeah.
I have Puka wide receiver 12, and I've been branded as the chief Puka hater. So I am actually significantly higher on Puka than St. Brown. It's just that the market attitude towards him is totally different. I think where I'm at with Puka is like, look, he has shown definitely enough where like every single player that you're either not 100% sure is good, or that you think is pretty old, or that, you don't know if they're ever going to matter. Like, sure, take Puka over all those guys. What I don't really understand is like once we get into this sphere of like true thoroughbred options that have demonstrated fantastic talent profiles, but have done it in a more traditional way, that have done it on a more varied route tree, that have done it potentially in more adverse circumstances, that have done it in college and have done it for multiple years in the NFL. Like, why do I have to take Puka over them? Like, wouldn't I just rather have the certainty to me with a Garrett Wilson, with a Chris Olave, with a Jalen Waddle? Like, why am I taking this bird in the hand and going out for Puka? Like, I'm just unconvinced, I suppose, by simply the like points per game go burr type argument that Puka's ceiling is actually that much higher than those guys as a player, because I just don't think he does as many things well. And maybe I'm wrong on that from watching him. Like, look, I'm not a film expert in the best of times, but I guarantee you I'm absolutely not a film expert at wide receiver. I think I have somewhat of an eye for running back stuff.
Yeah.
With Puka, like maybe I'm missing something. But then again, my question would be like, if he was that good, if he was like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, whatever, like,
why wasn't he?
You couldn't have shown that at BYU. BYU.
We don't. Yeah, it's funny because I agree with you. Like generally, your thought process here, I'm on board with like they're baking in way too much possible risk that wouldn't have been there if they're giving him less credit. They're giving him a ton of credit because of things that they're seeing, either statistically, film wise, from everything I've heard. Like, and again, I'm not in the best of times anything other than I know that like guy runs, he gets open, he catches it. His target share is still pretty damn strong with another guy that is usually I get what your stance is now, I guess is my point, that it's more that I know you don't like talking about market overreactions, but it's more of a market overreaction and you're eliminating any type of profit that could come from it, right? So it's
not about the profit that could come from it, it's the opportunity cost, right? Like my opportunity cost of investing in Amon-Ra St. Brown over his rookie season was like mostly like wide receiver 2 veterans. So to me, it was like that's a pretty survivable loss, Like he was like kind of same type of price range as like Jahan Dotson and Treylon Burks this offseason. And like we're everybody here, I'm sure, has some shares of Jahan Dotson and Treylon Burks on their teams, or Christian Watson or whatever. And it's like, are we feeling like those were great investments in the offseason? Probably not. But is having one of those guys on our team the reason why our team is failing? Like, no. Like it just wasn't. It wasn't that high of an opportunity cost. Like, okay, you could have had Chris Godwin instead of one of those guys. Is your team that much better? A little bit.
Yeah.
The opportunity cost of Puka is immense. So that's my issue. Is like it's not as much about what if he goes to 0. I don't think he's going to go to 0. I'm not trying to be like I troll in the group chat sometimes, that if I'm trying to be serious, like any player who's that good on an NFL field is going to be good. So like I'm not concerned about Puka long term. It's just like at the opportunity cost of like a Garrett Wilson, who is a guy that we were talking about a lot today. It's like, I think if Garrett Wilson gets sustained league average quarterback play, I think that he is like going to be in the same tier as Chase and Jefferson. And I'm not willing to give up that opportunity cost for Puka, I think it's more limited.
And this is something that maybe I didn't fully grasp in the moment when we were going back and forth. It's more of, it's less an indictment on Puka and more of a representation of your strong feeling that Garrett Wilson is that dude, basically.
Yeah, and it's not just Garrett. There's other guys in that mix too. I mean, this is like totally pulling a Brian, but it's like, look, I like Puka. I have him wide receiver 12. That's pretty high. It's just a matter of like, I see some of these trades where it's like, I see, you called it profit, and that's totally reasonable way to put it. Like I saw a Jonathan Taylor for Puka trade in one of my leagues. I've seen the Olave for Puka discussions, and, I don't think of it, I guess, as much in terms of profit in the sense of like how much more could he go up or go down. But I guess I just think of it in the sense of like, how good does he have to be where you're looking back on that trade and you're like, oh, that was a smash. Like we just talked about with Will Levis. It's like, trading up mid first for Will Levis would probably feel pretty uncomfortable. But also you could still look at a world where that's like a smash by 2 firsts. It's like if you trade Puka, like a lot of the opportunity.
Yeah, you can't win a Puka deal by
a lot of the opportunity to like win a Puka deal by margins is like you probably have to do it after the first couple of weeks. Like at this point in time, like that's kind of over. You can still win a Puka trade. Like if Puka's great, you can still win a trade. But like, I mean, by the same token, you probably can't win a Chris Olave trade by that much these days. But I guess I just feel more secure with that.
Man, you might be able to, man. Put Chris Olave with like Will Levis. That guy's breaking fucking fantasy, man. Give Chris Olave a good deep ball thrower. It's over, man. Like the target share and ADOT Chris Olave gets, his role is insane. Derek Carr can't throw the ball like most of the time. He's just not very good. And there's a lot of other problems with that. And Chris Olave honestly has some very weird stuff going on this year with not finishing routes. Has like concentration
driving
drop.
too fast.
Yeah.
I mean, whack him in the face mask.
Yeah, Olave's got some weird stuff, man. I don't know what's going on with him personally. He got arrested and shit. But
my take with Olave. My take with Olave is simply like he's just like a great player who's just not playing very well right now, but he's probably going to start playing really well soon.
And he's still getting like 10 plus targets a game, man. Like, I mean, he's going to eventually start crushing.
If you look at any elite fantasy wide receiver over the whole length of their career, like I can think of several off the top of my head and several I can't, but I promise you that every single elite fantasy wide receiver at some point in time had like a 4 to 6 week stretch where they were just like running cold. And I think the problem is like a lot of the time, like when you are running cold, like I think some people get mad when stats people are like, oh, he's just getting unlucky. It's like, yes and no, right? It's like, you're not, a lot of the times if you are running cold, so to speak, or you're running hot, so to speak, it's not like it's pure luck. Like a lot of that does describe you doing good or bad things, right? Like Chris Olave dropping open touchdowns isn't like unlucky. It's like he did that, like that was bad. But it's also the reason why volume is more sticky than efficiency generally is that like, a great player who we shouldn't reconsider. This is a lot of like when I get into what I like troll people and call them reactionaries or whatever. It's not as though I think that like these players are the exact same player for all time. But I just think generally speaking, a lot of very great players or good players or average players or whatever, we should still view them as what they are in a consistent way, even though we know that they aren't that every single week. Any given week, there's a chance Chris Olave is a bad player. That doesn't mean he's a bad player, but it means that he's capable of playing badly for 4 quarters. And sometimes, and we're all human beings, right? Like we just talked about like the sports psychology of Tony Pollard or whatever. Like sometimes I think people think of these athletes as though they're just like immune from the qualities of human nature. And they're not. Like every single one of us in anything that we're really good at has like for a time been not that good at it, started to question why we're not that good at it, compounded it by making more mistakes. And then usually you like get a little lucky, something works and things start to turn around, you get your mojo back. And I just think like that's, remember the 2021 AJ Brown season where it was like, oh, like he finally has an alpha target share that we've been wanting. But he just like, he's like dropping passes randomly.
Yeah, he kept dropping side like the ones he's elite at. Like, that was a weird year. Yeah.
And it was like, turns out he can catch. He just like played shitty for 5 weeks in a row. And then like we got like everybody got really tilted about it. And like some people were like, well, you have to move him down. And I always think it's like, well, you don't have to. Like you can just you can just kind of ignore it if you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So I think we've covered a lot of topics. Jacob and I are friends again. This is good. We needed to be standing in solidarity for this banner 18 season. So
Oh, fuck yes,
Before we go,
we need to go live
Jacob,
stream like all these Nuggets Celtics finals games.
Oh,
let's do it.
In. That's 100% happening. If they both get there, we're doing that, people. So if you want to see chaos in live form, not that you need it here, Jacob, but please share, plug anything that you want to pass along to.
Oh yeah, man, you're like the hardest working dude in the industry, man. Like,
I'm definitely not. So I appreciate that, but I have, you can read stuff thinking about thinking. I read. This week's a little bit different in terms of the content, but generally speaking, I read a piece called The Sunday Drive that comes out every Tuesday morning, which just kind of goes over a lot of like running back usage stuff, specifically like probably mostly focused on kind of streaming running backs for people that are looking at building kind of zero RB, hero RB lineups. But if there are ever any massive changes in like the top backfields, I totally walk through those. And then usually probably like every second week, I'll kind of have like a long form strategy column on Dynasty stuff. And this week we kind of reversed the order because I wanted to talk a lot about Jahmyr Gibbs' game, and it was on Monday Night Football. And I was like, I don't want to just like write about it immediately and rush it. So we flipped the order. So I have a piece out right now called Reasons to Trade in Dynasty. And I talk a little bit about like the market stuff. So if you're like one of those people that thinks I talk out of both sides of my mouth when I'm like trashing the market and liking the market, maybe that piece kind of helps communicate where I'm coming from, or maybe it doesn't. You can let me know in the comments. And then I'll have a kind of slightly altered version of the Sunday Drive later this week, where it's going to be, there wasn't a whole lot of backfield movement this week. So I'm not doing the full length column. What I'm going to do is do a pretty big deep dive into the Lions situation, how great Gibbs was on Monday, what I think is going to happen moving forward. And then I'm going to try and answer if Tony Pollard's bad. I gave you kind of the vibes-based answer tonight. I will dig into some of the numbers as well, so that for the people who don't just care about my pop psychology. And I also have a rankings update. So my Dynasty rankings, if you check them up on the site, they are all updated as of yesterday.
So he says he's not hardworking, and he lists 1,000.
Right, that's right. Yeah,
check out. So yeah. That's awesome. That's a great plug, Jacob. You're an absolute stud. Before we hop off, I just want to let everyone know, if you haven't yet, on Twitter we're market_watch1, and YouTube Dynasty Market Watch. 3 different words. We would love for you to like, comment, subscribe. We're always taking feedback, and we really want to hear from you. We want to make the show centered around you guys and what you want to hear and what you want to talk about. So please, please, please reach out to us. We're always going to be responsive, and we will get that show where it needs to be for you to enjoy as much as possible. So for Brian, for Matt, Jacob sending us out here with that green. We appreciate you, and thanks again.